Hello, good day everyone. Welcome to our virtual discussion on syllogisms. I am Mr. Peter Emmanuel Mara, and today we are going to discuss the modes and figures of categorical syllogism. In our past discussion, we have laid down the 8 rules of uh, categorical syllogism that will help us um, construct a valid syllogism. And to continue the discussion, we need to extend the validity, no? The validity of syllogism to its figures and modes. So it's not enough that we only follow the 8 rules, but it includes also the test of validity, includes also the figures and moods of syllogism. So when we test the validity of the syllogism, it must have 3. No? First, you have the 8 rules. Second, the figures. And third, the moods of syllogism. So let us proceed. The figures of syllogism shows us the different positions of the middle term in all possible combinations. Take note that, as I mentioned in our earlier discussions, no, that the conclusion always has SP, no, and it doesn't change. So it's a constant. It's a constant structure that S is always the subject of the conclusion, which is the minor term, and P, which is the predicate of the conclusion, is the major term. Okay, so let us just correlate that in our previous discussion. Now, as you notice, the middle term in all 4 figures are arranged respectively. No? And this defines the figure that it carries. So for figure 1, you have the middle term as the subject in the major premise and the predicate in the minor premise. The second figure has both the middle terms as predicates in the major and the minor premises. In the third figure, you have the middle term to be the both subjects, no? Both subjects of the major and the minor term. And in the fourth figure, you have the middle term to be the predicate in the major premise and the subject in the minor premise. Okay, so you need to bear in mind the diagonal, no? The diagonal, straight, straight, diagonal figure. Okay, let's go to figure 1. As we mentioned in figure 1, no? In figure 1, you have the middle term as the subject in the major premise and the predicate in the minor premise. So in all rules, we need to, in all figures, there are rules to be prescribed, no? In order again to avoid the fallacy. Now, the first rule tells us that the major premise must be universal. All figure 1, no, must have a middle term, or the major the subject, no, the subject of the major premise must be universal. So in short, it should be MU, no? And the minor premise must be affirmative. Okay, the reason being we follow this rule is that we want to avoid a certain fallacy, no? A certain fallacy that will somehow uh, violate, no? The violate the eight rules of syllogism. In this case, when you have a minor premise which is affirmative, necessarily your middle term, no, in the minor premise becomes particular. Now, if it's particular, but your first rule was not employed, that instead of universal major premise, you made it particular, no? So suppose this is not, the first rule was not obeyed, was not employed. And this is what we call a fallacy in against the eight rules of syllogism. The fallacy of undistributed middle term. Middle term. Okay? So, um, in short, in this case, these rules will help us avoid fallacies. Now, let's change this to you. Okay. So, the two rules for figure one. Now, the example here is, of course, you all know, this is your middle term, no? MU. So you have uh, the first rule, no? Employed plus PP. No? And then encyclopedias. Take note, it doesn't have all or some, but it's understood it should be all. No? All SU plus, okay, we employed the second rule plus um, MP. No? And then you have SU plus PP. Okay, let's check the consistency and the validity of the terms. We have PP and then PP, consistent. SU, consistent. MU, and then MP. Okay, let us review the consistency or the validity of terms in the premises and in the conclusion. When you talk about um, P or S, right? They appear in the conclusion, in both the premises and the conclusion, right? So if in the premises, no, the major or the minor terms are universal, they can remain universal in the conclusion. So we have premises, the premises, and the conclusion. No. So in the premises, if your major and the minor term is both universal and it remains universal in the conclusion, that is valid. If it is universal in the major premise or in the minor premise, no? Or in the major term, minor term, and in the conclusion, it lessened to particular, then this is valid. Why? Because when you talk about all, no, it also includes some. Next, when you have particular, major or minor terms, no? And it remains particular in the major, in the conclusion, then this is also valid because it just maintained its quantity. However, when you have particular, major term, or minor term, but it extends to um, universal, no? When it becomes universal in the major premise, or sorry, it becomes universal in the conclusion, then that is what we call an invalid movement. No, this is illicit, illicit major term, or illicit, oops, or illicit minor. What about the middle term? For the middle term appears in the major premise only and in the minor premise. If in the so this is for M, no? Middle term. If in the if in the major premise, the middle term is universal, it may remain universal because the rule states at least once should the middle term appear universal. But if it's twice, no, then it's no problem. At least once. So there is at least one universal. So this is valid. If in the major premise it is universal and in the minor premise it remains changed to particular, again the rule states at least once universal, so it's still valid. No? Now, if in the major premise it is particular and in the minor premise uh, it becomes universal, it's still valid. Why? Because at least once universal. However, if it is both particular, then this is what we call a fallacy. No? Fallacy of undistributed middle term. So in this case, this is invalid, no? For the middle term. But you cannot confuse this structure with how the major and the minor premises are put in the premise and the conclusion. So why is it different? Because the middle term deals with the premises, whereas in the major and the minor terms, they deal with not just the premises, no, but also the conclusion. So they are entirely different. Okay, so that's figure 1. Now, let us try um, to make a valid syllogism using figure 1. So the rule states that it must start with a universal statement, no, or a universal major premise. So you have, for example, all, sorry, okay, suppose you have um, all vendors are businessmen. No, they engage in business. When you sell something, you become a businessman, right? All vendors are businessmen. Okay, the rule states the major premise must be universal, and the minor premise must be affirmative. No, um, and then following figure one, then this becomes vendors. Blank are vendors. Mm, what can you think of as vendors? No, like um, um, all online sellers are vendors. No, all online sellers are vendors. So what can we um, deduce from here? Then all online sellers are businessmen. Okay, so let us check whether we have a valid syllogism. So we have M U plus P P, and then this is P P. P P, but hindi, you know, why are you not cooperating? Oops. Okay. PP. SU plus MP. So you have SU plus PP. Okay, PP and then PP, SU, SU valid, MU, and then MP. Okay, so we have this figure one syllogism valid, no? Especially we have the copula R plus R. So there's no issue on its validity and rule, no? So there. So it's easy. It's easy when you have at least the rules in mind and also how the figures are instructed. All these are impromptu syllogism. No, I have not prepared an example from the start. No, I'm just thinking of the possible examples. Figure two, you have both the middle terms to be the predicate in the syllogism. So we have the two rules. The two rules states one of the premises must be negative. Again, these rules will help us avoid a possible fallacy. No? So we have one of the premises must be negative, at least one. So suppose this is negative, the second or the minor premise. Why can it be both negative? Again, this is a fallacy. No? Um, the fallacy that can somehow make us commit fallacy of two negative premises, and that is the rule number seven. No? Rule number seven. And if our and if one of the premises is negative, then our conclusion is automatically negative because the conclusion always follows the weaker side. So there's a weaker um, side in our premise, and it becomes now it becomes the weaker, the conclusion will follow that weaker element in the premises. So the conclusion becomes weaker. Uh, the conclusion becomes negative. So the major premise, the second rule, the major premise must be universal. So again, it must start with all. Why why is the second rule significant? Because when you have a particular, for example, you have a particular and not universal major premise, but since you have a conclusion that is negative, your major term in the negative in the conclusion becomes automatically universal, no? And if your major premise is particular and you did not follow the second rule, which is universal, no, then this is a fallacy of illicit major term. No? So in order to avoid this, we need to um, make our major premise universal. Okay, so we have one example here, and later we can create our own uh, figure two syllogism. So we have all doctors are professionals. No? This is M. And then no child is a professional, M. So obviously we have figure two, but it must be also scrutinized if all elements, no, all figures, or and all uh, aspects in our syllogism are consistent. So we have P, S, and then S, and P. So we have PU plus MP, SU minus, take out, this is no, minus MU. Okay, at least we followed one rule. No? The first rule, one of the premises must be negative. And we started with a universal premise, no? Major premise. And then we have SU minus PU. So look at the major term. They are consistent. No? SU, SU, MP, MU, at least once. The middle term must be taken universal. Plus, minus, therefore, minus. Okay, so this is valid. So we need to make our own syllogism. No? It must start with the major premise must be universal, and one of the premises must be negative. Okay, so we have, suppose you have um, all um, all carpenters are or are not. No, all carpenters um, are skillful. No, all carpenters are skillful. Um, so we started with all. No, take note. The major premise must be universal. And since we have are, this becomes are not. And then since this is our middle term, skillful. So blank are not skillful. Like for example, um, what's the best subject here? Suppose blank are not skillful. Um, all mm, all Down syndrome patients are not skillful. So they suffer from a disease that makes them not develop a certain skill, no, that is um, perhaps needed in carpentry. So all Down syndrome patients are not skillful. So all Down syndrome patients are not carpenters. No. So let us check whether the validity is okay. We have um, PU plus MP, mm, SU minus MU, and then SU minus PU. Okay, let us check the validity of the syllogism. PU and then PU valid. MP, MU, at least once taken universal, valid. SU, SU, valid. Plus, minus, therefore minus. So in this case, we have figure 2 syllogism. Now we go to figure 3. Figure 3, you have um, um, both the middle terms as the subject in the major and the minor premises. So we have no, both the major premise and the minor premise having the middle term as the subject. So first rule is that the minor premise must be affirmative plus. And the conclusion must be particular. What is the reason behind this rule? Because if you make this affirmative, then necessarily your predicate becomes particular. And if your predicate is particular in the minor premise and in the conclusion it is not particular, then but then universal, then this commits the fallacy of illicit minor term. So that's uh, to avoid fallacy of illicit minor term. So that's why we have the conclusion to be particular. Now, there is no rule um, indicated for the major premise. No? So in short, it can be uh, all are not, some are not. Let's do that later, but let's discuss first this example. So we have no elected officials or appointed officials. So we have uh, MU minus PU, no? And then S, sorry, MP plus SP. Okay, so we have affirmative, no? And it automatically makes the predicate, which is the major premise, the minor term to be particular. So you take this, no? Some mayors, SP minus PU. Okay, let's check the validity. We have PU valid, SP, and then SP valid, MU, MP, at least once taken universal, this universal middle term, valid, minus, plus, minus. Okay? So let us make a syllogism out of the rules, no? Following the rules. The rule states the minor premise must be affirmative. Okay, so let us make a figure 3 syllogism. We have, for example, it's a good example. So we can start with all are not, some are not. Let's have some are not. No? So can we begin with an O proposition in this case? Let's have some, because we have um, um, some politicians. Yeah, are not. Some politicians are not um, pro people, no, pro people. So because some of them are just selfish and they don't think of the welfare of the people, no. So since this is your middle term, it becomes all. It cannot be some. Huh? It's all politicians. Since we cannot repeat some, it becomes all. And then we said it must be R. No, R. The minor premise must be affirmative. All politicians are public servants. No? So, and the conclusion must be particular. So we have some. This is, take note, this is M. Huh? Some public servants are not pro people. Okay? Or let's just change pro people to pro poor. I think that's a much better row or row or. Okay, so let's check whether we have a valid syllogism. We have M P minus PU, and then M U plus PP, and then sorry, S. This is S. S. And then this is S P minus PU. Okay, so let us check PU and then PU. Oh, they are valid. SP, SP valid. MP, MU once taken universal valid. Minus, plus, therefore minus. Oh, we have a figure 3 syllogism. Now, last, we go to figure 4. We have the diagonal, no? Inverted diagonal. We have the middle term is the predicate of the major premise and the subject of the minor premise. So there are two rules, no, but they are more of conditions, no, conditions on the rules of figure 4. We have if the major premise is affirmative, the minor premise must be universal. No? So if the major premise is affirmative, then this becomes MP. That's why the second clause, no, tells us that our minor premise must be universal, so that it avoids the fallacy of undistributed middle term, wherein two middle terms are both particular. So in order to avoid that, we need to make our middle term in the minor premise um, as universal. Now, in the second statement, in the second condition, we have if the minor premise is affirmative, plus, then this becomes particular. Same with the third figure. Same with the third figure. No, our the minor premise is affirmative, and the conclusion must be particular. Why? Because both figure 3 and 4 have the same structure in the minor and the major, and the conclusion. The minor premise and in the conclusion. Okay, if you have noticed it, they are both the same arrangement. Now, let's discuss this example. So we have all mountaineers are adventurers. So we have adventurers as the middle term. And then this is also the middle term. Take note, we have followed the first rule. No? And, sorry, this one. If the major premise is affirmative, then this becomes MP. And our minor premise is universal. So we have followed the first rule and also the second rule. No? Thrill seekers, which is SP. If the if the minor premise is affirmative, the conclusion must be particular. So let's form the schema here. PU plus MP, and then MU plus SP, then SP plus P. Okay, let us discuss the validity of the terms. PU to PP, is that valid? Is from universal to particular. If you have a universal premise and you concluded with a particular term, is that valid? Yes, it is valid. Um, SP and then SP, is that valid? Yes, no, no problem. Both are particular. However, if you have the middle term taken at least once universal, then the middle term is also valid. Plus, plus, therefore plus. Okay, so let's make a syllogism based on figure 4 statement. Again, there, uh, it must begin, no, um, it must follow at least one of the two conditions, no, or both, but not abandon the two conditions. You may just choose one or follow both, but never neglect or disregard the two rules or the two conditions. Suppose you have this is statement. Um, for example, all drivers, okay, it should be are no, all drivers are um, what predicate can we give to drivers? All drivers are, I don't like this example. Let's change it. Um, farmers. Let's talk about farmers. All farmers are uh, all farmers are undervalued, no, or uh, underappreciated. Mm. All farmers are underappreciated in the Philippines. No? We underestimate um, and we don't value their work in general. No? We look so lowly towards them. So you make this as our uh, subject. So all underappreciated individuals are suffering. Okay, are suffering. No, financially or what economically. So here we have figure for M. Then we have have to change the color so you can follow. This is M. Okay, and then this is PU plus MP, MU plus SP. So this is SP. Then we continue. Some individuals who are suffering are farmers. Suffering are farmers. Okay, so let's have the statement S or the schema SP plus PP. Okay, so we have PU to PP valid, no, SP valid, MP, MU valid, plus, plus, plus. Okay, so those are the four figures of syllogism. But anchored to the figures of syllogism is what we call um, the moods, no? Moods of syllogism. Now, the moods of syllogism is the last test of validity for a categorical syllogism. The mood of syllogism is the pattern of syllogism based in the types of propositions A, E, I, O. Remember, we have um, classified the propositions into four types. No, four types: A, universal affirmative; E, universal negative; I, particular affirmative; and O, particular negative. Now, there are 64 possible combinations of these propositions, assuming that they will be combined by three. There are 64 valid, but only 19 are valid. No, not all possible combinations in the syllogism can be mixed up, no, or can be formed. I'll give you an example. For example, if you have an O proposition, no, and then you have an A proposition, you cannot have an E proposition. If you have the major premise O, and then A, and then the conclusion to be E, why not? This is some R, all R. You cannot have all or not for your conclusion. No? It must be an O proposition for it to be valid. So take note, all these combinations are not possible to be mixed up, but there are only 19. And what are these 19? For example, in this example, you have no machine is a thinking being. Every computer is a machine. No computer is a thinking being. So we have no machine is a thinking being is an E proposition. And then every computer is a machine, an A proposition. And then no computer is a thinking being, E proposition. This is what we call the mood of syllogism. No? However, each mood must have a mnemonic, no? Mnemonic. And this shall carry the final proof of validity or test of validity of the syllogism itself. So let us check before we proceed further whether this is indeed valid by its schema and figure. We have um, uh, MU minus PU, SU plus MP, And then we have SU minus PU. So we have PU and then PU valid, SU valid, MU, MP valid, minus plus minus valid. So in this case, we have no fallacy committed, and it has a valid figure. But before we say they have a valid mood, no, let us first consult whether in this case, in an figure, in figure, what figure is this? Figure one, no, figure one. This is figure one, based on the middle term. The middle term is in this slight, no, diagonal. In this case, um, we have so in this case we have figure one. So figure one, EAE, and the mnemonic that stands for EAE is Celaren. No, so in this case, Celaren is the mood of that specific syllogism. That it becomes now valid because it falls under a specific mood. So we have 19 valid moods of syllogism that are separated from each other according to their valid figures. So like for example, figure one, you have Barbara, Celaren, Darii, Perio. Barbara, Celaren, Darii, Perio. So we have um, 4 valid figures in figure one. For figure two, no, we have Cesare, Cesare, Camestres, Festino, Barocco. That's for figure 2. No? And then figure 3, the Rapti, the Samis, the Pisi, Pelapton, Perison, Bocardo. And then figure 4, you have Bramantip, Camenes, Dimaris, Fesapo, Fresison. Okay, now notice that there are possible similarities among the moods in these 4 figures. Like for example, um, EAE, EAE are found both in the figure, the first and the second figure. But are they the same? Can we just say EAE? No. Ultimately, they can't be the same. Why not? Because figure 2 is different from figure 1. So if you only say EAE in your answer, this becomes wrong. Why not? Why not correct? No, why is it wrong? Because EAE can be found in figure 1 and figure 2. Another AEE, AEE, no? Also EIO, 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 EIO. So in this case, if you only answer EIO for its mood without specifying whether it's perison, fresison, perio, or festino, then you become confused. So you better become specific in what figure or what mood that is specific in each figure. So a valid syllogism has its corresponding mnemonic name. As we mentioned, in order for you to be guided, identify first what figure is it, no? What figure is it? And from that identification, you can go back again to the moods of syllogism, no? To the moods of syllogism and identify its types. Okay, let's go back to our previous examples in the other slides. Like for example, in figure one, no? In figure one, what we have Barbara, Chelarent, Darie, Ferio. No? So let us identify what mood of syllogism does it have. So we have an A proposition, and A proposition. So in this case, it must be bar, bara. A, A. Take note of the judge script. No? Or this is how it's supposed to be written, underscoring the uh, type of proposition in the capital, no, letters. Figure 2, no? We have A, E, E. What is this? What mode of syllogism is it? In figure 2, A, E, E, we have Camestris. Okay? So in figure 2, we have Camestris. Now this is ultimately valid. Figure 3, we have E, I, O. No? Some mayors are not appointed. We have figure 3, EIO. We have EIO in figure 3. Yes. And that is Ferrison. No? So in this case, it now has a valid mood. And in figure 4, you have A, A, I. AAI, you have Brahmantic. No? Brahmantic, so you have um, okay, so there, we now finished the discussion on categorical syllogism. Thank you for your participation. We will do an exercise about this, which shall be uploaded in a while. So thank you for your time and see you in our synchronous session.